All right. Welcome to the People for the American Way member briefing on the Trump impeachment and also how we can strengthen our democracy. We're excited about this conversation. We'll be led by our president, People for the American Way President, Ben Jealous. We'll also be joined by Executive Vice President of People for the American Way, Marge Baker. And our special guest today will be Impeachment Manager, Representative Jamie Raskin. We're excited about this conversation. We're excited about the opportunity to have all of you all join this important conversation. Also, please, in our messages, please drop in the chat messages of appreciation for Representative Raskin and all of the impeachment managers for their hard work around the impeachment process and really shedding some light on what happened at the Capitol and the president's connection to all of that. And so without further ado, I want to turn it over to our fearless leader, our president, Ben Jealous.
Thank you, Diallo. And thank you everybody for joining. You know, more than 20,000 of us have signed a thank you card to Jamie Raskin, Congressman Raskin, and all the impeachment managers. Their work really speaks to the essence of People For, why we were created, why then Congresswoman Barbara Jordan and Norman Lear came together to create an organization to fight back against the far right, anticipating that a day like 1/6 was coming, anticipating that we had to build a movement of the people of this country to preserve what was best about this country and build towards an even better future. And it was imperative that Trump be impeached again, put on trial. Trump's wrongdoing was so egregious it would have been inexcusable to ignore it or fail to demand accountability for it. Members of Congress were honor-bound to respond to Trump's conduct. And that's why so many Republicans supporting Trump is so egregious and so outrageous. We cannot allow them to pretend like they just did not defend a president undermining the U.S. Constitution, undermining the security of the members of Congress and the Senate, putting Capitol police officers in harm's way, causing a series of deaths, officers being maimed. This is on them. And we have to be clear that, quite frankly, that their movement has been building for a long time, and that's why the work that we do to counter it is so important. The House managers who presented the evidence against Trump are patriots, leaders whose actions stand in sharp contrast to those elected officials who tried to overturn a free and fair election in the world's oldest democracy. That movement, that action really speaks, quite frankly, to a comfort with fascism that we as Americans cannot tolerate. We are very proud of Jamie. I mean, he's a neighbor for many of us. He's a friend. He is also a People For alum. He was a fellow here for many of his years in the Maryland State Legislature. He is an esteemed professor emeritus now at American University's law school, the Washington College of Law. He has taught many of our friends constitutional law, and he taught the nation constitutional law from the lectern in the Senate, making the case for impeachment. So we're excited that he'll be joining us in a few minutes. While we're anticipating him joining us, I think he's scheduled to join us about 5 minutes. thought I would pull in our esteemed Executive Vice President, Marge Baker, just to talk a bit about how it felt to watch her former colleague, Jamie Raskin, take on Donald Trump.
Thanks for asking, Ben, and thank you to all of you for joining us. And it's just delightful to see all of these comments coming up in the chat and the accolades for the work that Jamie did. Jamie's brilliant. He's a brilliant constitutional scholar, and it was like so incredible to work with him when he was a fellow here, because he would just produce these incredible, masterful works of art explaining the Constitution in a way that people can understand. And it was just so extraordinarily exciting to work with him on that, and one creative idea after another. And then watching him through all of the family tragedy he was going through, understanding how important the role he needed to play for the country, for our democracy, for the future of next generations. It was just so uplifting. It was just so uplifting to see him in literally in all of his glory, taking on the entire Senate, taking on the voices of hate and bigotry, and taking on the attackers of our democracy in such a in such a heartfelt, brilliant way. For me personally, it was just a moving experience, and for the country, I think it was absolutely essential. We had to tell the story, and Jamie and his colleagues as impeachment managers told that story in an incredibly powerful, eloquent way, in a way that you just could not ignore and could not deny the reality of. So it was such a bittersweet time. It was so hard to watch, again, so hard to absorb the magnitude of what happened, so hard to see how close we came literally to a takeover of our government. And yet we triumphed at the end because the story was told, and it will keep being told. And when you see, right, when you see prevaricators like Senator Ron Johnson, Wisconsin, trying to deny the reality of what happened, it can't survive, because we have the story out there.
No, Ron Johnson's gone full on delusional, saying that these were Democratic Party operatives who came in to pretend that they were Republicans. Literally, as there's headlines about Republican Party officials being arrested by the FBI. But that's the world, that's the world that they live in. You say the same lie enough, they pray that you will believe it.
Ben, I was going to throw it back at you, because you know Jamie well. Let me just ask you, how did you experience it?
Oh, it was, Jamie was the first person to ever encourage me to run for governor of our state, and has been a dear friend for a long time. I was one of the people who spoke at his 50th birthday. He showed up as the guy he is. And I think those of us who know him know that he had just gone through a searing personal tragedy that he wrote about publicly. And it made it all the more just powerful, to watch him kind of fully in command of the moment, knowing what he was enduring personally. He is that strong, that courageous, that brilliant. And it was just nice to see it kind of all on full display. And I think, Jamie is aware, as we all are here in the DMV, as we call it, DC, Maryland, Virginia region, that the front line of the fight runs through the Capitol absolutely right now, where we're seeking to pass HR 1 and HR 4 and HR 51, actually get these real reforms done that our brother John Lewis was fighting for at the end of his life. So important to RBG. It also runs right through the Virginia Capitol, where there are elections happening this year. I think history will record the great victories a couple of years ago in Virginia, I guess now almost 4 years ago in Virginia, as a precursor to what happened in Georgia. And when you look at where a lot of these buses came from, they came from Virginia. There were people, there were Republicans in Virginia organizing these buses to come up here for this insurrection. It's so important that we do everything we can across this country to really hold the line in Virginia and not reward this party. One of the most poetic, I think, moments in sort of American politics in the last 4 or 5 years when we saw a trans candidate and a trans woman win in Virginia against a transphobic incumbent. That's the type of progress that we can make happen, that we have to hold the line on in Virginia. And I really want to thank everybody who is just committed to kind of building this movement in every state across this country. Because the other side, like Ron Johnson, is not an anomaly. Marjorie Greene Taylor's not an anomaly. You look at the millions of people who subscribe to QAnon and the tens of millions who are willing to really indulge in this propaganda coming out of the right that has no connection to reality. It just reminds us that if we really want to see the promise of our nation prosper, we've got to be willing to stand up, and fight. Jamie, one of the things that he does that's so important, and it's part of the tradition that Diallo and I both come out of, is he organizes his own Freedom Summer every summer, where he trains young people to be organizers. And it's really, it also, of course, Marge, I think, is a nod to Senator Wellstone and to so many other organizers who have come into the Congress and brought that with them. Diallo, what do you think is the kind of the, I guess, what has you hopeful in this moment? Thinking about how shook we were on March 6th in this region, what's the big fight that you're looking forward to right now?
Well, what has me hopeful, one, is that it was great to see our democracy in action, that they were, and do the hard work of moving that process along. I'm very hopeful, even before the moment of the insurrection, of what we saw happen in Georgia with voters exercising their voice to create real change, to change the landscape within our Congress. But I'm also I'm hopeful going forward because of the hard work that I see around the country as leaders engage in making sure that we're able to elevate the voice of the people. We look at some of the legislation that you mentioned, Ben, earlier, very hopeful about moving those pieces of legislation to continue to give us a stronger voice against those that want to disrupt our system. And, we have patriots that will stand up and fight for democracy, and doing that hard work going forward is exciting to be a part of People for the American Way, exciting to be working with you to create that change.
Amen, brother. I feel the same. And we are joined by Jamie. Jamie, this has been your fan club in full effect. If you want to see what that's like, you can just scroll through the chat. But suffice to say, Diallo and Marge and I have been just heaping praise on you and talking about just what an inspiring leader you always have been, but just delighting in the nation being able to see that as you tore into Trump. And God bless you and thank you for that. You're on mute, brother. You're on mute.
Forgive me. Thank you, dear Ben, and thank you, Marge, and thank you to all my friends and People for. I'm actually just stepping off of the House floor because I'm about to go speak on the Equality Act, which we are planning to pass today. So that's very exciting. We were delayed by some more antics by one of my QAnon colleagues who moved to adjourn twice in the middle of our debate. So anyway, I'm delighted to be with you guys. I'm so grateful to you for all of the amazing encouragement and solidarity and support and friendship. And, People for has been on the front lines of defeating right-wing authoritarianism and this drive to fascism, which now goes all the way to the top ranks of the Republican Party. And it is People for the American Way that has been standing in the breach, defending the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and the separation of powers and our democratic values. And, I'm just alarmed by what's been taking place with the GOP. And I don't want to sound too partisan because I know you guys are transpartisan and nonpartisan and multi-partisan and everything. But to me, it's just remarkable, this downward slide. And, the way that so much of their party has embraced basically violent insurrectionist impulses within the right-wing base and Donald Trump's clear incitement of violent insurrection against the Union. So, he's been going around claiming he's been exonerated by the 57-43 vote. I say no, he's not been exonerated in any way. He beat the constitutional spread, I suppose, which requires 2/3 for a conviction. But to have the vast majority of the Senate declare you guilty of inciting insurrection against your own country, I think is hardly an exoneration. So we convicted him in the court of public opinion. We convicted him in the court of history, I believe. We got 7 Republican members to come over who were from all over the country: New England, Mid-Atlantic, the South, the Midwest, the West, Alaska. Now right-wing cancel culture, to borrow their phrase, has been working to censure them, reprimand them, admonish them, just like they tried to get rid of Liz Cheney as the chair of the House Republican Conference after she spoke up in very forceful terms and said that Trump had summoned the mob, he assembled the mob, he incited the mob. None of this would have happened without him, and everything was due to his direction. And they tried to get rid of her, and they failed on a 2-1 vote. Ben, will you just have someone from your staff call my staff to say I'm on this call, because they keep calling me to tell me to get on with you guys and tell them
please.
Okay. So in any event, we did vindicate the Constitution. We stood up for the American way. And I think we reasserted what American patriotism is all about. We are unified not by virtue of being one race or one ethnicity or one ideology or having one cult leader. We are unified by virtue of having one Constitution. And we all agree to abide by the constitutional values. And so I think that we reasserted constitutional patriotism as a real force in the country. And this is a struggle that is going to go on for, maybe for the rest of our lives, but certainly for as long as, Trump remains the dictator and the cult leader and the mob boss of the people that have gathered around him.
What would you say to folks right now, to the members who are on the phone call, to the, more than 1 million people, for members across the country, about what they should be doing right now? I think people are eager to feel like they're helping push back. What's the most important thing in your eyes?
Well, look, I always go back to a passage I remember reading in Tocqueville, where he said that democracy is always either expanding and growing, or it's shrinking and contracting. And we saw what a dark future could look like under the shrinking and the contraction of democracy. I mean, it looks a lot like January 6th. It looks like basically mob rule in both senses, mob violence, but also rule by mobsters and, mafioso like Donald Trump, treating government as the private property of people who get into office, turning the government into an instrument of self-enrichment and private profit-making. So what we need to do is to make democracy work for people. I mean, the agenda that the new administration has set forth to meet the needs of the country in terms of COVID-19, in terms of climate change, in terms of the electrical grid. This is the real agenda of democracy, meeting the needs of the people. So I suppose it's not much more complicated than make democracy work for people. And then we also have to be vigilant about these attacks on it. What the political scientists will tell you, that the critical sign of a successful coup coming is an unsuccessful coup having taken place in recent history, giving the people who try to perpetrate that kind of coup the opportunity to study what their mistakes were, what their errors were, and then to improve it the next time out. So we are not out of the woods yet. We need to be organizing, assembling our people, mobilizing constantly to defend the Constitution, to defend democracy, and then to make the government work for people, because government is either going to be an instrument for private profit making and terror, or it's going to be an instrument to serve the common good.
What steps should Congress take to strengthen our democracy right now?
Well, we're debating HR1, which is critical. I mean, we need to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. You see how Trump's campaign converged around trying to thwart people from voting, stop people from voting, confusing people about voting, and then after he lost, then trying to discredit the election and overthrow the election results and substitute it with some kind of one party or one man dictatorship. So we need to be moving in the other direction. We need to be learning from everything that the democratic countries around the world have done in terms of strengthening and securing voting rights. And then we need to pass our Voting Rights Act to modernize and update what was taken away from us by our Supreme Court. We need to have universal voter registration. We've got to stop the purging of ballots. We need statehood for people in Washington, D.C. We need statehood for people in Puerto Rico. In other words, we need to get the trajectory of democratic expansion going again. So we're moving things in the right direction rather than in the wrong direction. And we need to make sure that former prisoners get their rights to vote back and to participate in politics back everywhere in the country. I think that's basically the rule in the vast majority of states, but there's still 7 or 8 states that disenfranchise. And we know about the struggle in Florida, which I know PFAW was integrally involved in, to restore voting rights to people and to prevent the state legislature from thwarting the will of the public and the initiative that passed down there. But I mean, that's critical. All of these things make a huge difference. Here what we're talking about is vindicating the rights of majorities to rule and to actually form electoral majorities in the states. And what we're getting instead is this effort to disenfranchise people and make voting more difficult and to allow conservative minorities to continue to tyrannize the rest of the population.
What do you say to somebody like Ron Johnson? Who says that these were, Democratic provocateurs, or Marjorie Taylor Greene, the QAnon conspiracy theories. Like, how do you deal with that out of the Congress?
Well, I mean, it's a tissue of lies, and each lie builds on another lie. So, you've got, the big lie was the basis for the attack on Congress on January 6th, but the big lie was also the basis of Donald Trump's defense when we conducted the impeachment trial. I mean, he continued the big lie, and obviously he wants to use that big lie the way that big lies have been used by totalitarian regimes and authoritarian leaders all over the world. He thinks that he's going to ride that back to power in 2024. So, I don't know what to say to somebody who basically acts like a cult follower to Donald Trump. I mean, it's a great humiliation and embarrassment for them and their families. And I've said they're all going to end up selling flowers and incense at Dulles Airport one day. I mean, they have surrendered critical thought, and they are acting, like they've just been brainwashed by somebody. I mean, it's a very scary thing. So the things that they say are not true. And, we need to contradict them on the facts and remind people that if we don't have truth, we don't have democracy. Then we're all subject to manipulation.
I mean, it's been known for a long time that Russian intelligence has an interest in getting people in this country to lose faith in their democracy. Do you ever worry that there's any involvement between these, in propagating these conspiracy theories like QAnon by foreign state actors?
Well, there's no doubt that, that's been taking place for a long time. There's a history of this going back to the 2016 election. Look, I believe that after 4 years of catering to, the authoritarians and the despots and the bullies and the dictators all over the world, the Putins in Russia and Orban in Hungary and Duterte in the Philippines and El Sisi in Egypt and on, that, Donald Trump now has turned that into a business plan. I mean, he's sending Jared Kushner all over the world, basically, to try to make deals with these people, so he can, pocket his ill-gotten gains and then spend that back into political power. But these foreign adversaries of democracy would love nothing more than for Donald Trump to come back to power. I mean, they really think that we might not be able to survive another 4 years of that. So that's a pretty shrewd investment on the part of people who want to destroy America as the world's greatest multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-religious, pluralist constitutional democracy. I mean, that's a good way to go. And they have had great effect with using the internet to convey propaganda and fake news. This all goes back to, Steve Bannon and Cambridge Analytica and the way that they successfully use the social media to propagandize certain parts of the population. And what do you know? They've activated the most extreme and unstable elements of the country. We saw it in Charlottesville. We saw it in Lansing, Michigan. We've seen it in mass shootings across the country. And we saw it on January 6th. With Donald Trump also being, the insider-in-chief, the critical cheerleader for these forces. I am very concerned about that alliance of reactionary forces from around the world, and then dictatorial authoritarian regimes trying to activate mob violence against real democracies. We can never let that happen again.
Do you see any chance to regulate social media? So much of it seems to be propagated through social media.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that it's a positive step that there's been enough pressure brought by people for and the civil rights groups and, anti-racist groups, that the social media have begun to respond and are saying, no, we don't want to be used as an instrument for the destruction of democracy, because the kind of racism and anti-Semitism and misogyny that they've been spreading are the gateway to destruction for democracy. The group that overtook the U.S. Capitol on January 6th was a tiny, tiny fraction of the American people. I mean, it's a tiny minority even of the right-wing or Republican minority. So the vast majority of the American people opposed it, and yet still, it was tens of thousands of people. And they used the internet to bring all those people together in one place and to unleash violence against the Republic. Well, that's a terrifying future for us if you can have demagogic leaders who spend all of their time trying to mobilize racist, white supremacist violence against democratic institutions. And so whether it's the social media like Facebook taking real action on their own, or Twitter taking real action on their own, or figuring out other ways to oppose it, we've got to stop the use of the social media to terrorize people who are in office in state capitals and in Congress and city halls and so on. And this was a real factor in what took place in the Senate when we had our trial, because we were hearing from a lot of Republican senators that they weren't even so much afraid of political retaliation by Donald Trump, although I think they were that too, but they were really afraid of violent retaliation by his followers. Most members of Congress don't have 24/7 bodyguard protection. And, these people have proven themselves willing to kill and to die for Donald Trump.
No, that's exactly right. Jamie, right before all this started, you went through an incredible tragedy. How do you stay strong for this fight?
Well, I've been bolstered by my friends and my family and my constituents and everybody that I've worked with in progressive politics. There is a crisis of mental health in our country, and especially among young people. And if you have, any mental health issues you're struggling with, and then you add on to it COVID-19 and, the cruel indifference of the then president, and just all of the extremism and hatred just pumped out into the air constantly. It's a very difficult environment. I've heard from a lot of young people since we've lost Tommy, and they don't think of their personal psychological struggles as separate from what we're doing politically to try to defend democracy and defend humanity. So to me, it's all sort of the same thing. Well, what else could I be doing at this point?
And Tommy was a beautiful warrior for justice in his own right.
Yes, indeed. And I know that you knew him, Ben. So,
well, and I just want you to know, 20,000 members signed a card to you, thanking you. There's just a lot of folks praying for you and your family, and just thanking God that, you're in this fight, thanking our lucky stars that you're in this fight. If you could just kind of give folks just a sense of why you're hopeful that we can get H.R. 1 passed in the current environment.
Well, first of all, thank you for saying
through
that,
the House and the Senate and into law.
I just want to express my gratitude also to all of your members and everybody in the People for community for being so supportive of Sarah and me and our daughters and our whole family. So thank you for that. It means a lot to us. Let me just say that, I think that, H.R. 5, which I've got to go back into, I think it's H.R. 5, the Equality Act, that's got every Democratic member on it as a co-sponsor. We saw an impeachment trial, complete solidarity among the Democrats. Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema and, everybody was with us. I think that people understand the stakes in these fights for democracy and voting rights and equality under law. And I don't think people are going to fool around with that. I long for the day when the values of People for the American Way will be the values of every political party in the country. And then we can, fight about stuff like,
actual ideas.
Yeah.
Here's
but right now, there's one party that's kind of upholding, or one big party anyway, that's upholding these values. But I think that within the Democratic Party, there's great unanimity that we are not going to be able to make progress until we break these anti-majoritarian, anti-democratic features of our system, like gerrymandering of congressional elections, like the exclusion of large populations that deserve statehood, like people in DC and Puerto Rico, and all of the obstacles to voting rights, which are interposed at the state level in every election now. So we've got to sweep these away if we're going to, resume the engines of progress in the country.
And then what do you say to young people when they come to your office or the Capitol? You see them on the street, Silver Spring, Tacoma Park, just about what they should be doing. It's, as you said, it is a tough time, and to the young people who have reached out to you or themselves in crisis in this moment.
Well, they can take a lot of solace from the past and the struggles that we've won, all of the civilizing movements of our history, the abolitionist movement and the suffragette movement and the civil rights movement and the movements for civil liberties and the labor movement, the environmental movement. That is the source of a lot of strength for us. And if you look at the Constitution itself, you look at the 17 rights that we've added since the original Bill of Rights, they all move us towards greater democratic participation, equal protection, due process, striking down discrimination in voting, women's suffrage, people in DC get to participate in presidential elections, no poll taxes, allowing 18-year-olds to vote, and so on. That's the real trajectory of movement in our country, and we've got to get back to that. But we need to teach that to the young people. And I think that we have made great progress in reality in the society, but we continue to have a political system that's being choked off by things like, gerrymandering and disenfranchisement and so on. So we need to target those, get rid of those, and get America moving again in the right direction. And the young people have a lot of great groups and a lot of great individuals and leaders to look up to. And, I hope we can connect with all of them, because the country is going to be theirs in short order. I'm afraid I got to go vote, Ben. So I send my love to everybody.
All right. And lots of love from all of us to you. Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you, Ben. All the best.
All right, thank you. And now I'm going to turn it over to our fearless organizer, Diallo Brooks, who led an army of organizers in November to reach and connect with 25 million Black men who are unlikely voters. Black men in 25 states who are unlikely voters. 3 million Black men who are unlikely voters in 25 states to turn them out, to help defeat Trump. Turned around, did the same thing in Georgia. Really an incredible strategy that had a huge impact across this country. And to Marge Baker, our fearless executive vice president, one of the best brokers of power in Washington, D.C. that I know, a true builder of great coalitions. So I hope you'll stay on with them to have that conversation. Again, I want to just thank everybody who has sent well wishes to Congressman Raskin. Our team will print out all the comments and make sure that they get to him personally. He really deserves, I think, all of us to just kind of put arms around him. What he and his wife has gone through, his daughter have gone through is searing. He's not alone. Many of us have had those sorts of tragedies in our family, have had suicides in our family. But it's also just a moment where I think everybody's a little bit more fragile because of COVID. And so I want to thank everybody for just sending him love. And most importantly, I want to thank you for the work that everybody who's involved with People For supports and does in their own right to defend our democracy. I'm preparing to take my kids on a trip this summer, and it'll start at Monticello. We descend from slaves who were the children of Thomas Jefferson's grandmother. And it will end in Lexington, Massachusetts, where my kids will learn that they descend from the youngest combatant at the Battle of Lexington and Concord. For a lot of our families, this fighting for this democracy has been a fight one way or the other, in chains or free from the very day that we got here, whether we came as immigrants or as slaves. We were already here as Native Americans. And I just want to thank everybody for recognizing that while we came here in different ships, we are all in the same boat now, and fighting for H.R. 1, fighting for H.R. 4, fighting for H.R. 51, and most importantly, fighting to preserve our democracy from the sort of angry hordes that we saw on 1/6. God bless each of you. I'm going to turn it over to Marge and Diallo now. God bless.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you for those very encouraging words. Thank you to Representative Jamie Raskin for his fearless leadership in fighting for our democracy, and continue to shepherd us forward as we, fight to create progress in this country and create change in this country, and to make sure that we are an inclusive government, an inclusive country, and we're very proud of the work that he's done to lead us. And with that, I'm actually going to pepper Marge with a few questions, a couple of questions that have already come in from members and some that are continuing to come in from members. But one of the things that a lot of folks want to know, Marge, is what are some of the things that ordinary citizens can do to kind of repair some of our greatest vulnerabilities in our governmental system?
So thanks, y'all, for the question, and also thanks to everybody for joining us. And it's like for me, it was just a real pleasure to be in Jamie Raskin's presence, and to see his spirit. He's a true hero. And it was interesting because what Jamie used a term, he's brilliant at coining terms about that we all need to be constitutional patriots. And I think that's what the answer is. And we can do that in so many different ways. And all of you as members are really helping us really organize, mobilize to get the For the People Act passed that both Jamie and Ben mentioned, which is the really once in a generation, very comprehensive democracy reform measure that includes strong voting rights protections that, if they passed, would override some of the numerous over hundreds of bills in state legislatures around the country aimed at cutting back on voting rights. So there's the For the People Act with the voting rights protections. efforts to get big money out of politics, gerrymandering protections, ethics rules. It's a huge comprehensive bill, and it will pass the House the beginning of next week, and there will be then a huge fight to get it passed in the Senate with the slim majorities in the Senate. So one of the things just to stay focused on that, focused on getting that measure through the House and into the Senate, where we will have to do just a huge amount of work that will also entail eliminating the legislative filibuster in order to get this For the People Act passed. That's one huge federal bill that's really important, followed by what both Jamie and Ben were talking about, which is the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, which is the measure that will undo the harm the Supreme Court did in its decision undercutting the Voting Rights Act, undercutting section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, which will be repaired through this measure, and that will be up next and will pass robustly, I believe, in the House, and then we'll have a fight in the Senate. And we have to understand these will take an enormous amount of energy, and at the same time, I think it's really important for constitutional patriots to understand that elections happen year-round, and even if it's not an election for president or election for Senate, there are key positions being filled at all levels of government, local, state, and national. And it is a 24/7, 365 days of the year proposition to make sure that we are fighting as hard as we can for laws that protect the right to vote, and then doing whatever we can, no matter what those laws are, to make sure that people vote. That's why we've seen success in Virginia. That's why we saw what happened in Georgia. So I think what we do is we work hard to get our laws improved, but do whatever we can to make sure that we and those in our community are actually voting, because it is going to be, this is a long-term fight for our democracy, and it starts with people voting for people who believe in democracy and not people who want to trash our democracy.
One other question that I have for you, Marge, too, is also what are some of the other things that we are working on at People for the American Way to create more just democracy as we move forward, not just on the federal level, but just in general?
Well, I think in addition to really looking at democracy measures that are or attacks on democracy that are happening at the state level, we have a huge interest in and as you know, and you may want to talk more about it, in dismantling racist policing and making sure that we are helping to provide information guidance on how do we reimagine public safety in a way that really makes makes government serve the people's interest in public safety and doesn't make policing the engine for violence against communities, particularly communities of color. So that's a huge piece of the work, and I might throw it back at you, Diallo, to talk a little bit more about that. But then the other piece of it that I wanted to just emphasize before I do that is all the work that we have ahead of us right now around the federal judiciary and the opportunity to undo the enormous harm Trump did in packing the courts with real far-right extremists, and to fill the enormous number of vacancies that are now coming up with fair-minded jurists who are demographically diverse, experientially diverse, with a demonstrated commitment to civil and human rights. And we have a huge opportunity now to start making a real impact on that. And I know our members are totally engaged on that, and their voices are really, really important. We have the opportunity to do this because this is, just not to get too much in the weeds, this is one area in terms of making progress in the Senate where all that's needed is a simple majority, 51 votes, and with Vice President Kamala Harris as the 51st vote, the tie-breaking vote, we can make this happen. We can make this happen. So there's going to be a huge need to focus on that. So those are just three of the areas that general areas we're focusing on. All of them converge on how do we create a more inclusive and responsive democracy. But Diallo, do you want to take just a minute to talk about the policing work? Because I think it's really exciting.
Yeah, I mean, I think that our work to do a deeper dive into what public safety should look like for all communities, not just some communities, is an important piece of the work that we'll be doing going forward. Really engaging the elected officials that we work with, the young elected officials that we work with, our activists that we work with, to really create models around what public safety should and could be. And so we're going to be really diving into developing the tools and opportunities for folks on the state and local level to really drive around what that change should be. And there's some exciting things that are underway from the project that we've been working on for almost half a year, a little bit over that at this point. And so it's really exciting. I think I was just looking at some of the recommendations that we're going to be working on earlier today, and I think it really does speak to the type of change that we can create on the local level that will be where the rubber hits the road for a lot of folks. So we'll continue to do that moving forward. And I'm excited to work with you on that, Marge. Ben has been really instrumental in kind of leading that conversation. And so we'll be pushing forward. So one other question I have for you as well, and it's a good question, it's come in from the chat or from the questions from the audience members. It's now that Donald Trump has kind of escaped his a second conviction, but he has been impeached twice. How do we work to reunite our nation? How do we work to bring people together to do what's necessary for our country?
I'm gonna go back to this image I can't get. This image of constitutional patriotism, right? This is what we need to do. Every generation, I think, has its moment to move our democracy more toward move our democracy toward being more inclusive, more representative, to continued effort to try to perfect our democracy. And this is our moment. And what's really interesting working on the democracy issues is that the country is there. I mean, 2/3 of the American people believe that we need a stronger, more inclusive democracy where voting rights are protected and we're not subject to the whims of big money interests that have too much power in our democracy. And that really deal with the gerrymandering issues that Jamie and Ben were talking about. Mm-hmm. So I think we bring people together over this huge, enormous challenge of continuing to perfect our democracy. And I believe that the only place that is a partisan issue is in the Washington, D.C., in the Senate and the House. It's not a partisan issue out there among the people. I mean, when you get 2/3 of the people supporting something like this, it means that a huge number of Republicans, Independents, Democrats support it. So I think we bring people together around that high-minded enterprise and the challenge that every generation faces, and this is our challenge of perfecting our democracy again to make it more inclusive, more participatory, more representative of where the people are. And it's a fight that is really important to be in, and I find very rewarding to be in. And we can do this. We can do this. And I know how committed our members are to all of these efforts, and so appreciate what they do every day on this.
So this is my last question for you, Marge, as we are almost at time before we wrap up. But one other question that was in the member chat was, is there legislation that can kind of slow down the untrue kind of propaganda from the right? And I don't know if that's legislation or if it's just what we just need to do public facing around the propaganda.
I think there's a multifaceted approach. One is literally the public pressure that Jamie Raskin was talking about that really has had an impact. I mean, it is literally helping large platforms that are platforms of distributing misinformation from understanding their obligations. It's going to the people who use those platforms, who provide money to those platforms, and pressuring those people not to put money into platforms that are perpetrating hate. There may be some legislative tools. There's a lot of conversation about removing protections that these platforms have for not monitoring their the content on their site. There's a whole, I don't think there's any one magic bullet here. I think there's a whole set of solutions. And the other thing is that we have to confront them as truths. I mean, I heard Jamie talking about this and Ben talking about this. You can't let them sit there. You can't let the craziness and the conspiracy theories and all of the hate mongering go unchallenged. And that's something that we feel is particularly part of who we are as an organization and why we were formed, to challenge that in every way that we can, and not accept the misinformation, the disinformation, and the hate that's spewing forth from a number of platforms right now.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, there's a lot of work that needs to be done on that. I think, you know, People for the American Way has been front and center in trying to push for that, but also push for the various vehicles of those messages to take that responsibility seriously, and for folks to really understand how that undermines the principles of what we are all fighting for. And that's not a partisan thing. That's something that crosses partisan lines, but we have to make that front and center and very clear. So I'm excited to be a part of a team that's working to push against that. So Marge, thank you very much. Appreciate your comments. I want to thank all of the members that joined us. And Marge, I don't know if you have any last words that you want to say before we wrap up.
Just a huge thank you. These have been really hard. This has been a hard, trying year, and it's been tough. And knowing that we're in this fight with so many of you who care so deeply and passionately and are willing to roll up your sleeves and work, it's sustaining, and really, really appreciate it. I mean, personally, I appreciate it. The organization appreciates it, and our country appreciates it. So thank you so much.
Thank you as well, Marge. And thank you to all of our members that have participated in this briefing, this town hall event. It is you that keep us going. It's you that we're fighting for and fighting with. We're excited to continue the partnership with each and every one of you all, and keeping you all informed, but also hearing from you all about what's important to make sure that we're moving in the right direction. Thank you for taking the time to join us. We're excited about the work that Representative Raskin is leading and working on, and many others in Congress. And we will continue to bring you more events like this to keep you informed, to give you an opportunity to connect, and for us to continue to work together in partnership to create real change. And with that, we will end our briefing. Thanks, everyone.
So long, everybody. Thank you.
Have a great one. Take care.